Testing. Hello? Can you hear me? If people can hear me, please let me know. Okay, good. As usual, I'm showing my regular levels of expertise here. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes in case some people are late arriving. And meanwhile, to all of you in the audience right now, feel free to start thinking up questions you may want to ask me about gaming or, well, maybe about other things. So I reserve the right not to answer some of those, maybe. This isn't a Turning Point US event, after all. Hello, everyone. We see we got some more people coming in here. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. The subject of tonight's live stream, which again, I'm sorry that last week I had promised a live stream and it didn't happen. And then yesterday I was going to do a live stream and it couldn't happen. And now, finally, somewhat exhausted and hungover as I am, the live stream can happen. So here we are. But the subject is my campaigns, comma, and people who didn't kill themselves. I don't know what people there could be that didn't kill themselves. Maybe the audience has some idea who might not have killed themselves. Good answer, Aaron. I think that's right. Kurt Cobain is a person who did not kill himself. And you know why we can say that? We can say that because Courtney Love doesn't have an enormous level of political power. All right, I guess we should get about started there. There's a few basic questions in the chat, and there's well, almost 20 of you now. Hey, that's wonderful. Thank you for coming. So, to begin, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords. And tonight I'm here to talk. Matt Stark asks, what's your favorite gaming snack? Huh. You know what? Actually, back back in the day, and when I was DMing in other parts of the world, it was probably just whatever chips or whatever there was, right? But here in South America, or at least in my groups, when we game, what we usually do is we start gaming at around 7 o'clock. The the evening meal is not at 5 or at 6 like it is in some parts of the US or Canada. The evening meal is usually somewhere between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night. Okay, so we'll start playing for a couple of hours, pause to order food, and there's all kinds of incredible, delivery of food you wouldn't believe here, and the prices are pretty good compared to like the same price that you might end up getting for going to certain fast food places. Here instead you can get all kinds of stuff, right? Gourmet burgers or empanadas or steaks, pasta, um, Arabian food, all sorts of stuff. So really, we don't snack at the table that much. Once in a while, someone does bring a bag of chips or some cookies or something like that. But we actually have a whole meal in the middle of the camp of the adventure. Aaron the Pedantic says, Pundit, when are you finally going to make a game for the SJWs that lets them enact table romances? I think that very question is probably full of bigoted and homophobic traps and who knows what else, isn't it? Ah, I know you're bigoted. Same Reza says, thoughts on CPD edibles. Is CPD meant to be a fancy an acronym for weed at this point, or what are we talking about here? I uh, I know what edibles was usually the term for in the old days, but I'm not too sure about. I guess it's cannabis product derived. Is that it, or something like that? Anyway, um, I think there's a time and a place for all kinds of drugs, and it's called college. And I sure did my share at the time. Mm. Lord Metal Demon says, question, how would you introduce a setting like Dark Albion in a game like Lion and Dragon to a group of players that are used to 3rd edition or 5th edition? Oh, that's a very interesting question. In case there's anybody watching right now during the live stream or later on who's not familiar, this is Lion and Dragon here. And it is a medieval authentic OSR role-playing game. And what it does is it takes the old school D&D rules, the original rules of the old school game, and creates from that model a new system, right? And the system that is part of the OSR is the old school Renaissance. And the new system in the case of Lion and Dragon is a system that is meant to reflect medieval authenticity. So there's elements of both like character creation and gameplay that are meant to emphasize a bunch of things that you don't see in regular D&D of any kind, because basically what regular D&D has is none of the assumptions, none of the paradigm of the medieval world. We call D&D medieval fantasy, but it's not really. At best, it's like medieval fantasyland fantasy, right? It's really 20th or 21st century values, in a fantasy setting, largely inspired by movies or by very non-academic sort of sources, of what we imagine the olden days to have been like. And on top of that, in a world where there's usually like a big pantheon of gods, right? So Lion and Dragon is for playing a game where there's strict social rules, where there's a lot of cultural elements of the Middle Ages that you don't see in most fantasy, medieval fantasy, quote unquote, settings. And it has a lot of elements of gameplay. So the magic system is probably the biggest difference in that the magic in Lion and Dragon is nothing at all like D&D. The ritual magic based on the grimoires and the magical writings of the Middle Ages. So it's magic the way medieval people imagined that magic works. Lots of talismans and alchemy, astrology, and weird ritual magic to do different things. The combat is more lethal The game also has a lot of in written social rules. So, anyways, how would that be introduced to a group of third fifth edition players? Well, the setting, by the way, that he mentions is Dark Albion, which is a setting that is made basically from the Lion and Dragon campaign. The campaign that created the Lion and Dragon game. The setting is basically a medieval version of a magical version of medieval England during the War of the Roses, and so it's actually a very role play heavy type of game. Of the sort of conflicts you'll find in a medieval world during a major crisis for the throne, some of which will be kind of reminiscent to gamers in from like Game of Thrones and things like that. So what I would say, probably the first way to introduce a group of third or fifth edition players to Dark Albion is to say, well, look, this is a fantasy version of our world. So it's like our world, but there are monsters and magic really works. But it's all based on how actual medieval folklore thought of these monsters and this magic and all that stuff. And it's during the war that was called the War of the Roses, which is Game of Thrones. If you like Game of Thrones, you'll probably like Dark Albion, the campaign, right? And if you don't like it, then you probably won't. And because we have to change things like the magic isn't the same and that sort of stuff, here's Lion and Dragon, which is, if you've played D&D, you'll know how to play Lion and Dragon, but the rules are different because they're specially made to play in this type of world, in a more gritty, somewhat more realistic, I guess I hate that word, but let's call it that, sort of setting where you can play in a real medieval authentic context. So the lords are lords, the people that aren't lords are not lords, right? There's only one god or one church, and there are heresies and witchcraft and things like that, of course. But you have a powerful institutionalized church, you have the crown, and you have all kinds of social rules around that, and even the quests and the adventures are based on medieval history and medieval folklore and medieval legends. So that's how I would suggest it, really. And I guess as to our first campaign, I'm running 4 campaigns right now. I run 2 a week, basically. One on week 1 on Friday and on Saturday, and then week 2 on Saturday and on Sunday. And my Friday campaign of week 1 is Lion and Dragon. And right now I'm running a Lion and Dragon campaign that is actually playing out the Arthurian legends, the specifically a kind of Mallory based one, and obviously I'm borrowing a lot of elements from the incredibly good Pendragon RPG, and using the Great Pendragon campaign book as somewhat of a source book. But the rules we're using is Lion and Dragon, the system we're using, and well, the setting is England during the time of the Saxon invasions. Right? So it's a much more primitive version of England than the high medieval period of Lion and Dragon. Though there are a few anachronisms because Mallory. See, one of the things you have to know about Mallory and the Morte d'Arthur was that Mallory was a knight during the War of the Roses, during the war that the Dark Albion setting is based on. And his story, his version of the story of Arthur's death and all of that is actually a kind of analogy of what was going on, not, in 400 and whatever, but rather right then in 1470 or whatever, right? In the time of the War of the Roses. And so there's a lot of the culture of the Arthurian knights, as per Mallory, is much more medieval, of course. So we do it that way. And the campaign's been going really well. We've been now for, I think, over a year. It has to be over a year, yeah. Which has been, it's been 10, 15 years of game time, something like that. Yeah, something like that. 15 years of game time so far. So Uther Pendragon is dead. Arthur has not yet shown up. They're in the middle of the worst period when they're being conquered by the Saxons. And the player characters are trying to hold together one small area that is still sort of independent from Saxon rule. And for that campaign, what I've done, see, in my first Dark Albion campaign, which was the first Lion and Dragon campaign, which was the Dark Albion setting, what I did is I had two different characters for every player. So every player would get to roll up two characters, and at the start of each session, they could decide, sometimes with or without hints, which of the two characters they would run. And the reasons I did this is because there could have been some adventures that would be more for a certain type of character and then not so much for another. So if you had a highly political adventure, you might want to use one of your characters. If you had an adventure that was more about going out and killing stuff in the wilderness, you might want to use your other character, right? And then also because mortality is pretty rough in Lion and Dragon. It's not too difficult to get killed. So what having two characters to play meant is that if you're switching back and forth between them, then even if one of your characters dies, the other one is still there. So you're not starting completely from scratch again at level 0, which is the starting level in Lion and Dragon. Instead, you've got one guy that's starting again, but the other one can still continue to do higher level stuff. So that's what I did in the first Dark Albion campaign. This Dark Albion campaign, I've actually done it a bit differently. Everybody has two characters again, but one of those characters is guaranteed to be a knight, right? Because I mean, it is the Arthurian legend, right? So you got to have a knight. So one of their characters is knight, and the other one they can roll up at random. It could be whatever social class, it could be whatever character class within the limits of what they're allowed to have. And so this is what they've been doing, and basically they tend to split the group into two different parties. You know, all of them are playing the same characters in one group and the same characters in this other group. The characters in the one group are the knights, obviously, who are doing all the knightly stuff, very high end. You know, they get involved in negotiations with the Saxon chiefs, with the other British lords that are still fighting against the Saxons, and all of that sort of stuff. And then and big mass combat battles, right? So the other party is a mixed bag, right? Like there's a fighter who is like a mercenary knight. There's a magister, which is to say a magician, though. In fact, one of the interesting things about Lion and Dragon is you can be a magister and have a lot of lores and never actually have a lot of magic, right? So this guy, all magisters learn summoning from the beginning. They know how to summon things in theory, but they don't have necessarily the tools or the keys to make the summoning happen yet. But he ended up having lores and lores, and so he has all kinds of knowledge. And he only very recently, which is now like I think level 5 or 6, started to get actual magic. Because one of the details in Lion and Dragon is that when you level up, you roll on a random table to see how your character advances. The table's based on your class, and you can either roll twice every time you level to see what kind of new benefits you get from leveling up, or you can pick once. But most people roll twice. So we have that guy. We have we have a cleric in that group, and then we have we have a cleric in the first group with the knights, and then we have what's the other one? Maybe we do have a cleric there. Maybe there's two clerics there. Yeah. And well, a few other characters. We have one character that's actually a nobleman who had to flee. His land was conquered. His family was killed and his land was conquered by the Saxons, so he's hoping to get it back. Really interesting stuff. A good group, but basically they're two very different games. So on the session where we play with Group 1, these are the knights that are trying to control, to maintain the domain. It's all domain management stuff, trying to save the kingdom. And in the other group, you have this party that are basically a group of agents for one powerful landowning knight called Sir Amig of Tilshead, who is a very old knight who was once in his youth a great monster hunter and has some very sinister kind of connections with all kinds of powerful people, right? Like he knows Merlin, he knows the Lady of the Lake, he knows the Queen of the Fairies, right? And all of them either respect him, fear him, or may have had sex with him at some point or another, right? So he's quite the guy. And now he's a very old man. All of his friends are immortal. It's kind of a bummer for him. But he's sending them out on tremendously terrible, dangerous missions to either fight monsters or deal with supernatural menaces in the area, or obtain things that he wants, which are usually seem to be for some kind of a nefarious purpose. Sorry, we're back. The more serious kind of supernatural adventures, right? Whereas in the group A with the knights, a lot of times they might go the whole session. I mean, sometimes they'll do really epic stuff, right? Like one of the characters got a sword made out of water, right? Like that's the magic, super powerful sword, relatively early in his campaign too, because of something he did for Merlin. But for the most part, the knights a lot of times will go through a session where they won't actually encounter any supernatural opponents. They're fighting other humans, and then this other group are almost always ending up fighting. If they're not fighting supernatural creatures, at the very least, they're fighting people like cultists or something like that that are trying to cause supernatural trouble. So that's campaign number 1 out of 4. And my players, I gotta say, are having a very good time with that. Being on a Friday, we've had some issues because sometimes people get other things to do on a Friday night, and that's made it a little bit difficult to keep it together. Um, anyway, so let me know if you have any questions while I start going through the questions that you've already put up on the chat here. Let me know if you have any questions about what I talked about in this particular campaign, or if you have other questions you want to ask me about other stuff. Lord Metal Demon says, I recently ordered Lion and Dragon and all the Dark Albion books and can't wait to use them in my game. Thank you very much, Lord Metal Demon. We really appreciate that. Let me add to the comments of Lord Metal Demon. There are many ways that you can thank me for the work I do and for the videos I make and these live streams. You might notice we don't have super chat here. That's because it's not enabled where I live. But if you want to help me out, in the link in the description of this video, there's a link to the RPG Pundit Presents site on drive-through, where there's almost 100. We're getting very close to 100 issues of RPG Pundit Presents, which are PDF source books, adventures, setting books, monster books, all kinds of really interesting stuff that you can adapt to any of your OSR / old school D&D / almost any other form of fantasy gaming needs. And all of them are relatively inexpensive. They range from 99 cents to about $4.99, I think. So it's about the equivalent to what people usually give for super chat. So if you want to help me out with that, then great. And you get something in return, right? You get an interesting product. There's a lot to choose from. Besides that, though, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button so you'll be warned about future live streams like this one, whether to come to them or to try to avoid them, whatever you consider the warning good for. And be sure to share my videos, this live stream or other videos from my channel. The more you share, the more people we get. I'm up to more than 1,500 subscribers now, which is great, and we keep building it up and spreading the word and people getting interested. That's a really good development. So please do. Let's see what else we've got here. Samariza says, CBD comes from hemp. It doesn't get you high. It just reduces stress. Oh, I had no idea. I knew there were that sort of hemp, substitute or derived or whatever medicinal products. If it doesn't get you high, I have a little bit of trouble seeing the point, though. I guess if it is a better stress reducer than other types, like in medical trials, then great. I guess that would be something. I guess I don't have a strong opinion on it. I don't need, non-medicinal hemp to reduce my stress. Guys, I'm sorry about any audio problems. How's that audio sounding right now? Just a quick sound check here. Anybody? Let me know if the audio is okay. Or is it bad? Audio sounds fine. All right. Sometimes I have trouble with these recordings. Eventually, I'll probably get a better phone, but this is supposed to be a pretty good phone for recording with. Samariza says, the French are frogs in Lion and Dragon. Don't think I didn't notice, you bigot. No, you're not right about that, Samariza. In Lion and Dragon, there are frogmen, but it's never explicitly said that they're French. In Dark Albion, it's explicitly said that the French are frogmen. That's a different story. Brian Nguyen says, Pundit, have you personally evoked any of the goetic entities in your magical practice? Were you able to hear and see them if so? Well, it's a bit off topic, but yes, I have evoked goetic entities and other entities to visible appearance. Yes. So that's my answer. Same Rise says, do you think wizards would realistically take over the government in most D&D settings? You know what? I don't think so. Certainly not in a medieval authentic setting, right? Like, here's the reason, because some people say, well, if magic really worked, even in like the way that we imagine that they imagined in the Middle Ages, then that wouldn't actually be medieval authentic because the wizards would take over everything. Well, no, they wouldn't, because if you look at the biographies of wizards, you'd know why that's not the case, right? Magic is something that is complicated and takes a lot of effort and has a lot of trial and error. And then you have this powerful institutional church that's on the lookout for magic being misused. And then you also have, very expensive working costs for making magic. So all of those things, plus then the fact that most people that are doing magic are either doing it because they're really pathetic money grubbing little people who want power or what have you, and are not able to get it by other means than magic. So those would be your kind of bad guy wizards who would probably get themselves killed before they could cause any serious trouble, though maybe once in a while some of them could. Or there'd be people that are looking at magic as like unlocking the secrets of the universe, right? It's the same reason that scientists don't take over the government, in most real world countries or something like that, right? Like the wizards and magicians are going to be more interested in finding out the great secrets of the way the world works, the way reality works, discovering the powers of magic, and having conversations with extraplanar beings and things like that, rather than trying to take over, military and political power for themselves. They'll probably want to be patronized by people who have military and political power. Some of them would probably be advisors to those people, but they wouldn't be. Most of them would actually be really, really bad at any of the day-to-day things that you need to have political power and to hold on to political power, especially in a medieval context, right? Now you could say, well, what about in D&D? Because in D&D you have, all these guys able to cast fireballs and things like that, and I guess that would depend, but really, one should try to look at your D&D world, and unless you really want a world where the wizards take over everything, in which case you need to really make a good explanation of why and how they take over everything. Magic would have to be something that you could really systematize, that just about, anybody, or at least a certain type of person could do, and could do consistently and could do easily and without great difficulty, right? It would have to be a world where people could get to high levels pretty quickly if you're using the D&D system, because one magic missile per day isn't going to really cut it, right? To take over the world. You're going to need organized effort by a whole group of wizards, right? You need to have some kind of wizard religion or wizard conspiracy or something like that. And they would have to be able to organize themselves in such a way as to not kill each other, to keep everything together. Their biggest opponents might be other really powerful wizards. So there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way of that, even in a not medieval authentic setting, right? Even in your standard D&D game. So no, I don't think it is unrealistic, even in like bog standard D&D, that wizards are not in charge of everything. Sam Risa says, did you kill the cat boy yet? No, we haven't. However, I think in the next session, the cat boy is going to receive a letter with very important information about Hillary Clinton in that letter. And I think after that, he's going to have a very hard time of things. He might end up killing himself. He might be one of those people who have killed themselves. Um, Paul Cooper says, "How do you feel about these noob SJW and woke interlopers trying to force their agenda on our pre-existing culture?" Well, Paul, have you been watching my channel for a while? I think that a large part of my channel, that about half of it, is dedicated to fighting those people and to proving those people wrong and to explaining why adopting their ideas would be toxic to the culture and will ultimately not be good for the business side of things either, right? I mean, we see this in other venues. I was just thinking today, the series Batwoman, right, which apparently is doing very badly in the ratings. Batwoman, if it's going to have a season of what, 22 episodes, something like that, let's say, because it's not like one of those Netflix things. It's more like a standard. Like, I don't know how many episodes The Flash or Arrow has, but let's say 22 episode season, right? How much is it costing per episode? Because it's probably going to cost what, at least $1 million per episode to produce, right? So let's say it was that, more or less. That'll be like $22 million to create, right? How much money are they going to make of this? Like, I think as of the last episode that they've aired, they're now down to only about 1 million viewers a night, and they've got an investment of at least 22 million, right? Even if you're not counting all the peripheral stuff, it might, when you add all of the extra stuff that they've had to do beyond the production cost itself, you might even get close to doubling that. You might be around $50 million for Batgirl, which is going to have terrible ratings, right? Guess what else cost $50 million to make, right? The Joker movie, right? So when you've got these two things relatively not too far away in the area of costs, right? Probably Batwoman won't cost quite as much as the Joker movie did, even if you add all the stuff on there together. But not too far. Then you look at what Joker made versus what Batwoman made, and you look at the people, all the same people that were saying Batwoman is going to be a great hit. It's going to be amazing because it's so wonderful and so well created, and it's going to say some important messages to our culture in the age of Donald Trump and all these sorts of things, right? The main character is LGBT, and there's going to be all of this progressiveness in it, and that's what people want, and it's just going to be amazing. All the critics are going to agree and support it and say how wonderful it is. Those are all the same people who were saying about Joker, oh, it's boring, it's the worst version of the Joker, it's going to be a total failure, the Joker is a white straight male, this is going to be dangerous, the incels are going to have an uprising, and this is going to be a disaster, you should never make this movie because it's just going to be a mess, and the people doing it are misogynists, and all of this sort of stuff. So if you're an executive, how much self-denial do you have to be in? How far down that rabbit hole of progressivism do you have to be in, looking at this, that the people that said that Batwoman is the way to go were the same people that said that Joker is going to be a terrible thing, it's going to be a disaster, and the Joker is probably going to make $999 million more than the Batwoman in profit. so like, why are you listening to these people? At what point are you going to not change your mind about that? Anyways, that was a bit of a detour into commenting on pop culture, but the same things apply to gaming, right? I think 5th edition was not designed to be a woke game. It's not designed to be in any way a reactionary game. It's not designed to be exclusive of anyone. It's designed to be a really good modular edition of D&D that is very easy for a DM to change and alter to suit their own needs, the needs of his own party or whatever, right? But it's basically neutral. And then you had these people that had relatively little to do with the actual thought process that went into creating D&D that are coming in now and are trying to wokeify it, that they ultimately won't be satisfied with that. So I think what you'll see is eventually, if this isn't kind of stopped in its track beforehand, at some point Mike Mearls is going to lose his job. At some point, somebody, probably Crawford, will be put in charge, who is an absolute SJW. And then they're going to try to make a new edition of D&D that's going to be unbelievably woke, and it's going to to fail miserably. And meanwhile, the OSR is going to keep plugging along. Same Riza says, knights are very honorable to their lords, peasants, but if it's an enemy lords, peasants, well, chop, choppy. Listen, actually, one of the things I try to push in Lion and Dragon is that besides being medieval authentic, it also doesn't have any of the 21st century values and any of the 21st century prejudices about the Middle Ages. Because what we see nowadays, and this ties into this thing about woke culture, is that you have any time now that you make a medieval or pseudo-medieval setting, right? The aristocrats are all corrupt and terrible. The church is all corrupt and terrible. Peasants are always oppressed and horribly mistreated by these corrupt and terrible people. It's basically the Marxist dialogue, plus for some reason there's a whole bunch of people of color in 15th century Britain or something like that, right? Like that's what you get today, right? Everybody was being oppressed by this hierarchy of class and of gender and of race and of whatever, even though it's like the Middle Ages. And the truth is that that's not really an accurate perspective of the medieval world. Not only were knights honorable to their lords' peasants or to their own peasants if they were landed knights, but generally speaking, you didn't go around killing other people's peasants unless those peasants were part of a levy, right? Like if they were the peasant army that had been put together by the other kingdom's knights to fight your peasant army, then obviously the peasants are going to be killing each other, and you're going to have to kill some peasants to get to the knights, which are the people you really want to fight, because the other knights fight each other, right? And this is how in the War of the Roses entire houses were wiped out, by this warfare. They weren't entire houses of peasants, right? They were entire houses of lords. But you don't want to really do much to the peasants, not necessarily because you're wonderful people, but because you're not monsters, and because the regular peasants are not actually something that affects your problem of warfare at all. If it's a civil war, at some point you want that kingdom to be at peace, and so you want the peasants to be productive. And if it's not a civil war, and it's a foreign war, then yeah, you're going to want to plunder and rob stuff. And of course, there might be some very nasty incidents that happen along the way. But on the whole, you're going to want to be very careful how much of that you do, because there's always going to be the potential risk of reciprocity, right? And there was a lot of kind of codes to follow that they weren't always followed. Of course, there was a lot of stuff that didn't happen, but there's also not this perception that it was all just this kind of cynical postmodernist brutality, of a repressive system. The reason medievalism worked for so goddamn long is because it was actually a system that was mutually beneficial for a lot of people. And yes, of course, if you were in the aristocracy, you got to have a better lifestyle out of that, of course, right? And so I'm not saying it was a fair system. I'm not saying it was better than democracy. There's probably a few people watching right now that are going to say that, people from the tradcons or the alt-right or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, that's nonsense, right? But I'm also not. I don't want people to think that the other side of the coin, the SJW idea, that this was just like horrific oppression, right? Unless, of course, you're talking about a kingdom that isn't like a white kingdom, and then it was all wonderful sunshine. All the Aztecs were so progressive until Cortez showed up, right? They had such a wonderful culture, and everyone was happy there until the evil white Spaniards came. Anyway, Shocker CK says, I'm eagerly waiting for the L&D companion book. Soon, I hope. Look, the OSR Medieval Authentic Companion book is now done. It is absolutely done. And it is, what we're doing now is getting the proofs. And as soon as those proofs are confirmed, it's going to be available. I think it'll take about another week. And I'm so sorry, because it's like the third week in a row I've said that. We had a few complications and setbacks, but I think now it's going to come along. It's going to work out. George Whittlebach, Lorraine McClary, Hoopy says, you still haven't killed Catboy. No, I haven't killed Catboy yet, but I don't know. Maybe you did. You arrived a bit late, George, but I said that in the next DCC session, the Catboy is going to get an envelope with some very damaging information on it about Hillary Clinton. So that should probably accelerate the process. um, Lord Metal Demon says, question, could you possibly run DCC in Dark Albion? Well, you could, but then it would be like a very gonzo Albion, you know, it'd be a very weird, I mean, unless you changed the magic rules completely, or you just didn't have wizards, then maybe. Um, but even so, it would be a very unusual choice. Let's put it that way, right? Like that's why my two of my favorite styles are medieval authentic and gonzo, but that's why they're two different styles, and I've used two different games for them. So I guess that while we're on that, I'll go on to my next subject, which is my next campaign, which is my DCC campaign, which at this point I think is, yeah, it's the longest running campaign I'm currently running. It's on week 2 Sundays, so it should have been done today, but I didn't get around to doing. We weren't able to play today because I had some complications this weekend. But at least that meant that I managed tonight to do this live stream. So that's something, though. I'm sure my players don't think that's a good changeover. We very rarely skip playing because in this campaign, because it's a Gonzo campaign and we're allowed to be goofy about it, right? In a lot of my campaigns, I have very strict rules about whether or not you can play, whether or not we all play if people don't show up. I demand a lot of consistent attendance from my players. And so if they don't show up in a lot of campaigns, that session could be canceled because they're not there. And that usually gives people a sense of responsibility. In the DCC campaign, though, I've got kind of a core of 7 players, but there's a bunch of other people that have come in and out of that game, and in theory could come whenever they wanted to and play, and then not, whatever they like, because it doesn't really matter because we just find a way to put them into the game. The Dungeon Crawl Classics is the DCC game, right? Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you're not familiar with it, it's one of the best OSR games out there, and I say this even though it is a game I personally had nothing to do with. I didn't make it. I didn't write for it. I didn't have anything involved in its creation. But it's an amazing, amazing game. And what it is it takes kind of the D&D elements of weird fantasy and takes those to the max. And it does some really clever things with the character classes. Warriors are super cool. Wizards are super cool. Thieves are really interesting. Clerics can call direct divine intervention and stuff like that. So it's a really good game system, and it's a world that is really weird and messed up in many ways. And so I created a setting for it, the world of the Last Sun, that I thought was a better reflection than, because I saw a lot of the products, like the adventures for Dungeon Crawl Classics, were actually doing stuff that was I think very conventional fantasy in a set with a system that has such weird pretensions to it, right? Like one of the things in Dungeon Crawl Classics is that if you're a cleric and you get a 1 on your magic check, because unlike D&D where you memorize spells, here you have spells and you have to check a roll to see if you succeed at casting it every time you cast them. Then you get divine disapproval and God punishes you. Not usually a very serious punishment, but well, depends how much you fail, how often you fail. But what that means is that it wouldn't matter, whatever god it is. It doesn't matter what god it is. It doesn't matter what that god believes. It doesn't matter if what your cleric is doing is for the service of that god, or is going against that god, or is something that would offend that god, or is trying to do something that would really be important for that god. It doesn't matter. If you fumble, God punishes you if you're a cleric, right? So I thought about that. I said, well, what kind of God would do that, right? Well, that would have to be a God that's crazy and a God that is mechanistic, right? So in my Last Sun campaign, God is this computer which isn't functioning correctly, right? So all clerical magic comes from the God program, which is a super AI that runs this world of the Last Sun. And my world of the Last Sun has everything in it, right? Like it's a giant world. So you could go all over the place. I basically thrown in all of Arrows of Indra in there. I've thrown in a whole bunch of material from other sources in there. I've done my own version of other people's stuff in there, like the floating city from Joby Bittman's DCC adventure, or my own much cooler, of course, version of Venture Satanis' Alpha Blue, and all sorts of stuff like that, right? And so it's a weird world. You could go to places that are completely medieval, places that are super high tech. There's all kinds of monsters. There's always a life-threatening disaster. The setting itself is set after a terrible disaster that befell this last world that is basically now a vessel for the remnants of all the remaining life in the universe to try to escape the end of the universe. And yeah, the characters. One of the things about DCC is a lot of people who play it only play it very low level. They do one shots with zero level characters that get themselves. Zero level characters in DCC are very vulnerable. They die very easy, so much so that it's recommended you make like 3 or 4 or 5 of them when you create them, and then pick the one that survives to be your first level character. But a lot of people just stick to that low level of play. And the thing is, Dungeon Crawl Classics at higher level play, at level 3, 4, 5, 6, and right now we've got a character who's level 9, right? Bill the Elf. It's amazing play. It works really, really well. If you run it as a full long campaign, it's just fantastic. And yeah, we've been running it now for, Jesus, I think coming on 7 years. I think it's coming up on 7 years now that we've been running this campaign. It shows no sign at all of slowing down. The characters have done a bunch of epic things. Of course, a lot of characters have died. The only surviving character from the beginning of the campaign is Bill the Elf, and he is now level 9 out of 10, because in Dungeon Crawl Classics, there's only 10 levels. And then after that, he's going to do like some kind of immortality quest or something, I guess. Probably that's what we'll do. My campaign logs of Dungeon Crawl Classics are posted on my blog, usually a week after we play. And so you can see the craziness if you go to my blog. I think my blog's in the description in this video. And a lot of the elements of the Last Sun campaign are in my RPG Pundit Presents series. Almost all of the gonzo stuff that you see in like half of the issues of RPG Pundit Presents, which again, the link is in the description below. Those products are taken right out of my Dungeon Crawl Classics campaign, and there's like some really, really wacky stuff, right? So, my rules on high-tech weapons are from there, which is RPG Pundit Presents number 3. The Hipster Elves, RPG Pundit Presents number 4. You've got, what else? I've made various gazetteers of certain areas in the world. The gazetteer of the Northern Wildlands, the great city of Arkholm, which was one of the first campaign locations, though they haven't gone there too much lately. I did 2 RPG Pundit Presents about Arkholm, which is a really weird city where there's this constant struggle between different gangs and power groups. The Fantabulous Gonzo Robot Generator, a set of tables for you to create robots with a Gonzo style for your OSR purposes. That's RPG Pundit Presents number 19. Lots of others that I've produced out of the, almost 100 issues of RPG Pundit Presents. So if you like Gonzo gaming, then here's your great chance. You should go and check out RPG Pundit Presents. The link is in the description of this video. You'll notice that I don't have Super Chat here, so if you want to support me, one good way to do it is to find an issue of RPG Pundit Presents that seems cool to you, and purchase it. And it costs, about as much as a Super Chat normally would, but then you get something in return immediately in the form of that product, which you can use in your game. So anyways, if you have more questions about my DCC campaign, start asking them. I'll be answering questions as we go along. I'm kind of mixing between describing, for anyone arriving late, I'm mixing between describing my campaigns and answering questions in the chat. Let's see here. Zvolve says, kind of okay. How's your hangover going? Well, I'm fine. George Whittlebach, Lorraine McLaren, Hoopy says, VLV, you better not make me send Bill Wilson's character sheet to Pundit. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. Uh, I'm guessing that's something to do with the death of Catboy. Catboy is another character from the Dungeon Crawl Classics. So, like, people know about people. Some of viewers know about other characters from that campaign because of these campaign updates, which are a real kick to read. They're really funny. Ryzen says the issue with base D&D being medieval authentic is that magic is magic in general. How much will the population explode if you can control weather, summon food, and cure wounds and disease? Well, the answer is if only a small number of people can do that, and those people can only do it once or twice a day, and you can only do it in so much of an area, and it has so much duration, it's not too likely to have a huge differential effect, especially when if you're like able to do things like produce extra food using magic, which you very well could do, then that could actually end up being a bulwark against technological progress, right? So you'll see the very things that would require people, the infrastructure would require that people be able to take over the world would kind of be thwarted by the presence of magic itself. Brian Nguyen says, RPGPundit, what can you tell us about your favorite Rifts campaigns? Well, I ran several Rifts campaigns, but most of them were a long time ago. Like Rifts was one of my favorite games when I was in my teens. As far as I'm concerned, it's a great game. I know that some people don't like it, but I think it's pretty fantastic. I ran a Rifts campaign that went from, I think, around when I was 11 or 12 until I was about 22. So it was about a 10-year long campaign. Might have been a little bit later than that. I don't know. I might have started a bit later. I don't remember what year Rifts came out. But basically from the moment Rifts came out until I was finishing my undergrad, that's how long I ran Rifts. And, it was a stupid adolescent kind of game, that one, but I still really loved it. Later on, I ran a couple of other Rifts campaigns. The latest one I ran was a few years ago, where we had this element of like a advanced high-tech starship that ends up getting caught in the world of Rifts, and they're trying to adapt. They have a lot of resources and power, but they're also surrounded by all the batshit stuff that happens in Rifts North America, right? So the coalition is hostile to them, the DBs are hostile to them, the Zydekic are to the north of them, right? And they have to try to maneuver their way as a new group within that Rifts North America setting. And it went pretty well. It was a pretty good campaign. Sam Riza says, the Batwoman show is completely incoherent. At least the Soviet Union created interesting propaganda. Well, sort of. We remember the really interesting propaganda, but the Soviets created 90% of the propaganda they created was utter shit anyways. Sam Riza says, thoughts on the newest Star Wars movie? Well, I don't have a lot of thoughts about the Star Wars movie, to be honest. I don't think it has come out yet, has it? Are you talking about Rise of the Skywalker? I'm not even going to watch it, so that's my answer. If you're talking about the Mandalorian, though, I just saw the first episode of the Mandalorian the other night, and holy crap, that was good. I really liked it. I was stunned because I was expecting it to be utter garbage. Maybe it will become garbage later, but I don't know. Maybe the production of the TV series is a completely different production than the people that made the movies. I'm not sure. But if you have not watched The Mandalorian yet because you don't like the Star Wars movies being made now, like, because you're sane and rational and normal, you should watch The Mandalorian because it's nothing like them. It's nothing like those movies. Episode 1 was just an action-packed, fantastic, a fantastic episode. If it stays that way, like, I don't know, some of you might have seen episode 2 already. I don't know. Tell me if it stays that way or if I'm going to be terribly disappointed. But if it stays that way, The Mandalorian might be like another one of these things that obviously as soon as the SJW see that a male-oriented heroic male figure or whatever, anti-hero maybe, but we don't know yet. But I mean, he was heroic enough not to kill the baby. I'm not going to say more than that at the moment because some of you might not have watched it. But anyways, this show just screams to me from the first episode. Looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, it seems really likely to me that the SJWs are going to claim that it's bad somehow because they're going to really hate it. They're going to be really intimidated and frightened by it. It's a guy who's losing his job to machines and to and that a bunch of the social justice rebellion has kind of screwed him, and but he's just trying to do his job. He's just trying to get through life, and then he also has to fulfill some responsibilities that he has to his people. So like it's all of the things. It's like, I mean, did they get Jordan Peterson as a consultant on this or something? It was just a huge surprise. So I don't know. Maybe that's what you were talking about, and if so, I really like The Mandalorian. Ovaltine Patrol says, I bought a bunch of the Present stuff. Thank you so much, Ovaltine Patrol. I really appreciate it. I really hope you enjoy it. I trust you will. Not every episode, there's 100 issues almost of RPG Pundit Presents. So not every issue is going to have material in it that's going to really work for you. But I hope that for the most part it will. And of course, you can pick and choose now. So that's great. And yeah, please do check out Lion and Dragon when you get back from your trip, Ovaltine Patrol, because I think you'll find it a very interesting RPG if you like medieval authentic gaming. Same Rises says, why do we hate Catboy exactly? I just want him dead for the memes. That's basically it, Risa. Why haven't you killed Catboy has turned into a meme of my live streams. Every time I do a live stream, people come on here and say, have you killed the Catboy yet? Or why haven't you killed the Catboy? And so, there's that actually translated into the setting where I ended up having a bounty hunter start going after the Catboy to try to kill him because a mysterious nobleman named George Whittlebuck Lorraine McLaren Hoopy hired him to kill the Catboy for reasons nobody knows. And for some reason, none of the player characters have bothered to find out, right? And the person that George McLaren Hoopy sent to kill the Catboy is a death angel, a kind of an extraplanar assassin that works for the spirit of death, who is destined to kill people. Right when he's sent to the material plane, it's with a destiny. And McLaren Hoopy to hedge his bets, to make sure that the Catboy's friends didn't stop the assassination. He paid double. So he paid first for the man to, that's the name of the guy, he's the man, to go and to come and kill Catboy. And then after he's done killing Catboy, to go and kill the head of the Sky Nazis, which are a group of bad guys, obviously, in the setting, right? And so since, even though they're, Catboy is their friend, none of them want to kill the guy that's coming to kill the Catboy, because if they kill that guy, then that guy won't be able to kill the Sky Fuhrer, and so anyone who kills the man, the assassin coming to kill the Catboy, will be accused of being, of wanting the Sky Nazis to succeed, right? So they're for the sake of not appearing that way, they've ended up doing just staying out of it, right? And Catboy's been having to survive by himself, which coincidentally has led to him becoming actually more badass. It's all been kind of counterproductive, in fact. But yeah, it's largely a meme, and it's a meme that has filtered into the campaign itself, which tells you the kind of campaign that is. Zavolv says, how's the multiverse made in The Last Sun? So in the setting of The Last Sun, I kind of explained this in one of the RPG Pundit Presents issues. I think it was Miscellaneous Wonders of The Last Sun. I talk about the planes, and somebody who knows their stuff will know that the planes in the world of The Last Sun are meant to be a kind of a weird, not a parody, but a twisted version of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life that is very popular in Western magic, and of course comes out of Hebrew mysticism. So there's like 10 spheres, 10 basic planes, 10 of the principal planes, the 10th of which is the material plane, and the first of which is called the crown of creation, and that's where the God program is. The crown of creation and the two other planes next to it are blocked off by this enormous source barrier that plunges anyone trying to cross into the abyss, so that you can't just planar hop to there. It's like blocked out. There's only certain really secret ways to get there, and the player characters did in fact do that in the course of the campaign. It was part of one of the epic quests that took like 2 years, I think, of gameplay for them to get to the crown of creation and to try to fix God, which they sort of semi did, but not exactly. And then you have like 7 other planes at the bottom. That's the last of which is the material plane, and then the other one's like the plane of fire, the plane of blood, the plane of stone, the plane of jade, and then the gray plane, right? So, and the one in the middle, the center pin of the lower planes is called Wisconsin. And in between these planes, there are semi-planes that connect 2 planes to each other. So in between the plane of blood and the plane of fire, there's the plane of blood and fire. And then there are a lot of like little planes that are connected through to these larger planes, which is usually where the daemons, the lesser AIs that wizards make pacts with live. And around and in all of it is what's called the neutral zone, which is the astral plane. And the abyss itself leads down to the nether regions, which is where the traditional style demons live, and where the spirit of death is, and where people are sent after they're dead, unless they were really, really good people, in which case they get to go to Wisconsin. So I hope that explains your question. That's how the planes work in the Last Sun setting. Lord Metal Demon says, how can GMs curb the standard 2019 modern sensibilities when running a game like Lion and Dragon or a campaign like Dark Albion? Cease to respect NPCs in position of authority power? That's a very good question. Well, in the introduction to Lion and Dragon and in the introduction to Dark Albion, I have a section which are basically the same one in both books. I more or less just cut and paste when I did this. That gives a description for the DM of the central parts of a medieval authentic experience and what that means you have to break out of. And so I talk there about what you have to make your campaign look like if you want it to be medieval authentic, which is to say, first of all, on a practical level, that the level range is going to be low, that the vast majority of people in a medieval authentic setting would be level 0. And so people that are level 1 are actually kind of pretty accomplished already. And like the most powerful people at least this is how I put it for Dark Albion, the most powerful people in the Dark Albion setting are maybe like levels 14 to 16. You don't have like people that are level 99 or some nonsense like that, right? Second, social status is incredibly important. And in the book, I describe a lot of stuff about social status. I do this both in Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion, though in Dark Albion I go into a lot more detail about that, about things like the laws, about fealty to your lord, sumptuary rules of what you're allowed to or not allowed to wear, how you have to address people, all that sort of stuff. Because as a DM, what you will want to do is when a player is about to break one of those social rules, right? And then, I talk also about rules like about monotheism, about the role of women, about the opinion people have of magic, which, by the way, in the medieval period is not, all magic is bad, which is one of the preconceptions people tend to think. It's that, magic is a kind of natural philosophy. It's a tool. It's like the science of the era. And if you're going to use it, you have to use it for good and for the service of the church. And if you don't, then you're one of the bad people, right? You're a witch or a heretic or a person that makes pacts with demons. And that the wilderness is a place of chaos and so on and so forth, right? And so like people by default will tend to want to have a world that is stable and that is secure. And so the worst thing that can happen is a world where there isn't that stability. The stability of feudalism was a lot better than the anarchy and chaos that happened when feudalism broke down.
So in terms of the social rules, what I do in my campaigns when I have a newbie and they're thinking, oh, this is like Waterdeep, right? So there's the Earl of Strathclyde or whatever. I'm gonna go and just tell him what I think, right? Because that's what they would do if it was, Prince Happenbap of the Shires in the Forgotten Realms, right? Because in the Forgotten Realms, it doesn't matter. There nobody has any social authority because it's actually just 20th century U.S. So you go and just like you'd go and protest Donald Trump or something, you might go and speak your mind to the King of Waterdeep or something, and you'd and so this player would think, well, I can go and speak my mind to Richard Crookback and tell him what I think, even though I'm just a peasant. So as a DM, what I would do is I would tell the player, look, your character would know the social rules of the setting. The social rules are like this. This is how you have to behave. This is what you have to do or not do. In this situation, your character shouldn't even be talking. He should just be there, unless someone asks him a question. Or, if the character's a knight, well, you can say, well, your character should only address with the most respect possible. And because he's a duke, you'd call him your grace, and you'd, act in this way, and so on and so forth, right? Now, I would tell the player, you can do that or not. It's up to you. You can act however you want to, but this is what the proper way of behaving would be. And in this world, also, I would add this, in this world, behaving improperly is not something that's seen as a heroic and bold act of individualism, right? It's seen just as a contemptible act that breaks down the social order. So if they can get that through their head, they'll probably realize, okay, I have to act in different ways than I was used to acting in a normal campaign. If they don't get that through their head, then their character should suffer the consequences of what you told them would happen. And those consequences should be, delineated. In Lion and Dragon, in the back, one of the appendices, it has rules for the laws, medieval laws and punishment, right? And so it includes there the laws for things like petit treason, which is when you disrespect a lord or a knight, when you disrespect your social better. There's fixed punishments that were detailed in the medieval period. So that person should probably suffer those punishments. We had in the current Lion and Dragon campaign, we had one character who was playing a Scotsman, and he was a barbarian basically. He was from the far north, and he'd come down there, and he had acted all sort of disrespectful, in a way that his player thought was really cool. But because he was a barbarian, he was outside the social norm. So I kind of incorporated that a little bit. I said, okay, so there is a certain amount of tolerance here, right? And so that's kind of, it's sort of expected that this guy isn't going to be able to behave like a normal person would, right? But at some point he just broke the line completely, and I forget what that was. But he did something that was really serious and got himself arrested, which was something that in our world would not have been really serious. I'm not sure what, I think he was caught fornicating with someone or something like that, right? So like he was caught doing it not with like some important person, but like one of the scullery maids or something. And the person that was the family of that scullery maid brought him to trial, and it didn't help that he was a heathen and all this stuff. And so the character the player had a lot of trouble really grasping the medieval authentic context. And at one moment during the trial, it's like he suddenly said, okay, now I realize what's going on. Like there was a snap, and he said, okay, my character the next day is going to come in there and he's going to say that he's realized the error of his ways and he wishes to be baptized, right? And of course, that was the perfect thing to say, right? Like that's a one-time use, get out of jail free card if you're a heathen, right? Because if you say, I'm going to be baptized, I'm born again, I'm changing my ways, right? Then as long as it's you do a good enough job of making it seem sincere, you can, you're going to be spared, right? So he was spared that time. Though later he screwed up again, and then his character ended up having to be, he didn't die, but he disobeyed his lord, who was another player character, right? And so that player said, I disavow this guy. I don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. And the local countess ended up sending him to become a servant in one of the castles, right? So he basically got removed from the campaign. But because, conversion only works once. But yeah, that's a good example. I hope that answers your question. Steve Park says, "Hi Pundit, I just bought Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, and Cults of Chaos. Can you recommend other more historical grounded D&D resources like them?" Well, no, I really can't. One of the reasons I made Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion is that I don't think there is D&D based medieval authentic games out there, right? Like that was, to me, it seems crazy to think that the D&D went 40 years without having a game that is really medieval authentic. There are sort of pseudo D&D games that approached that in certain ways, right? Like the what was it? Chivalry and Sorcery was like sort of medieval-ish, right? But not really. But it was better than D&D was. And Harn is like very early medieval. The Harn setting and Harn the system. But again, not like it was really good medieval in some sense, but it's like Dark Ages first of all, so it's like not what most people think of as medieval. And it's also definitely not D&D as a system. The only other resource I can recommend to you, and I don't mean to say this like with if somebody else can think of other stuff that is medieval authentic and wants to share it in this chat, please do, and I'll tell you what I think about it. But the only other resource I could recommend to you is the RPG Pundit presents issues. Half of them are medieval authentic resources. There's additional magic systems that aren't in Lion and Dragon that that add new stuff like grimoires, the tarot, advanced astrology, new magical objects, enchantment, glamour. There's a couple that are coming up still. So anyways, there's all kinds of stuff like for the magic section. There's guides to the aristocracy, guides to the clerical order, and how to do a general like order of warrior holy knights, in the style of the Templars. There's the guide to the aristocracy. I mentioned that one. I'd say there's the courtly events. There's stuff for managing a merchant, being a wandering merchant in the period. There's lots and lots of adventures, medieval authentic adventures, and now the first. Was it more or less the first 25 or so medieval authentic issues of RPG Pundit Presents are being put together in a book that will be coming out probably next week or the week after that. I can't promise 100%. It's up to my publisher. It's not on me. But I'm really hoping that it'll be out within the next 2 weeks at the very latest, which will be called the Medieval Authentic Companion, the Medieval Authentic OSR Companion. That's right, Medieval Authentic OSR Companion, and it's a collection of the first. It's a 266 page collection of the first bunch of medieval authentic issues of RPG Pundit Presents, not counting the adventures. The adventures won't be in there, but all the other stuff will be. So it'll include new character classes, a whole bunch of new magic systems, a whole bunch of stuff like courtly events and intrigues, and other source book, the domain management stuff, the mass combat stuff, though those are also already in Dark Albion. All kinds of new material are going to be in there for you to use, 266 pages worth. So if you haven't already bought the RPG Pundit Presents issues, the early ones, or if you want them now, they'll be available in softcover and hardcover, I think. I think it's going to be available in both. I know for sure it'll be softcover. I'm not 100% sure about hardcover yet. But yeah, you'll be able to get that, and that'll be the next book that you can buy. So I hate to make it sound too much like an ad for myself when you were asking about other resources, but it's very hard to recommend other ones that are specifically for easily functional with D&D and the OSR. But again, if people have ones, let me know what you think. Tell me, give me suggestions of which ones you think would be good, and I'll tell you what I think of them if I know of them. Same Ryza says Boba Fett read 12 rules for life. His room is now very clean. Yeah, that's the Mandalorian basically. Ryland Joran says, why has my reply vanished? It's nothing to do with me. It is possible if your reply had a link on it or something. Like apparently now YouTube is censoring live chat comments in real time based on algorithms. So if you said certain words, or if you posted a link, especially, I think links are always out in the live chat. They don't let you post them unless I think you're the guy who made the live chat. So if that might have been why, Ryland, but I certainly didn't remove your reply. I didn't. I don't think I saw your reply either. Sorry. Lord Metal Demon says, "Do you fudged dice rolls in any of your campaigns? And if so, do you recall details of why?" Well, obviously, yes. I have fudged dice rolls. When I was young and stupid, I tended to do that fairly often. I would do that a lot of times. In my case, it was usually out of a combination of either benevolence or wussiness, you could say, in fudging dice roll to save people's characters from being killed, right? And I thought I was being nice, though maybe I was also, worried that they would be really upset if their character died or whatever. And so, this is one of the standard reasons for fudging. I do not, I believe these were youthful indiscretions on my part. I sincerely apologize for them. And of course, now I don't really believe in fudging dice rolls for that or almost any other reason. I think there can be very rare occasions where a DM might fudge a dice roll. And so, let me give you a couple of examples. First, the most obvious one is if it's a dice roll that is meant to help through the use of random generators to influence the establishment of the world. So let's say your characters are wandering around somewhere, and you're in a region somewhere, and you make them have a random encounter because the die roll indicated random encounter. You roll on that table and you get a certain monster, and maybe for some reason you as the DM think that that's not the right monster, not because it's too powerful or too weak, but because of something to do with the environment, or because you just think, well, no, this doesn't make sense here, or something like that. And then rolling again there is obviously okay, as far as I'm concerned. If it's like world building rolls and not stuff to do with things like combat, then I think that's fine. Right. I think there can be some other instances where that might also apply, right? Like that there might be a few other cases, including in situations of combat, where maybe in theory dice fudging could apply. But I think as a general rule, it's not a good idea. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to give yourself a carte blanche to do that, right? You don't want to be, especially when it comes to stuff like combat or with opposed rolls against player characters. And you really have to look at your motivations for doing it. You don't want to do it because you think that your NPC shouldn't be killed by, too early in the battle. Like if your NPC gets killed in the third round because the player characters got really lucky rolls, then just let that happen, right? Lord Metal Demon also asks, with regards to your own campaigns, which ones do you wish you were player instead of GMing? I really love GMing, so I'm pretty happy with them for the most part. I guess that if I was to choose out of the current things I'm running, I suppose that if I had to pick one, it would probably be Lords of Olympus, which is a good moving into the third of my current campaigns. I'm now running for about a year now. I've been running Lords of Olympus campaign. Which is Lords of Olympus, in case you don't know, is not an OSR game. It's a diceless RPG. It is inspired by the Amber diceless RPG, the original diceless RPG, where in that game, that was created by my late great mentor Eric Wujik, and at the time when it was no longer in print, I made Lords of Olympus in part so that there would be, first of all, a kind of a second edition that would clean up a few problems in the rule descriptions that sometimes made it hard for DMs to understand how to run the game or how to run parts of it. And then also that would allow, for there to be a published, rule set for the game that was available. Coincidentally, right around the same time, another company came out with Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, which is also a really great version of that same diceless game. In fact, all three games are basically compatible with one another. They're really good. I recommend any of the three. But my particular one is Lords of Olympus. And in Lords of Olympus, you play the sons or daughters of, or children, I guess, if you want to be miscellaneous, of Greek gods. And it's in a multiversal world where Olympus is like basically the end point of the multiverse that spans out into all the way over into chaos in the distance, right? And so there's infinite possible worlds, including the modern Earth, including the classical Earth of Greek myth, including any weird world you could think of or your players could think of. And people can travel between the worlds using these different magical pathways that require you to be given this blessing of movement by one of the three principal gods, Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades, or by cheating using the techniques invented by Prometheus. And you get involved in a typical Lords of Olympus campaign. You end up having a child of one of the Greek gods. So it could be, you know, a really well-known god like Apollo or Hera or Zeus or Poseidon or something like that. Or it could be some really unusual or rare god that you're not too familiar with, like, I don't know, Tyche or Nike. I'm only picking ones that end Ike. Or I don't know. You could be a child of one of the Titans, you know, like Leto, or you could be a child of one of the minor gods like Cloaca or Garus, the god of old age, or something like that, if you wanted to get into really weird territory. But you know, so your characters end up being part of this enormously large, hugely dysfunctional, multi-generational family of gods that are constantly scheming and plotting against each other. And this can be done as a real, like, cutthroat, very, very high fantasy game, because it's very, very high power levels in the game. That has all kinds of, like, you know, conspiracy and politics in it, and you know, scheming, player versus player stuff, because the players will have different allegiances because they'll have different connections to their families. And it could be done as a really serious campaign. Most of my campaigns have been that. But in this current Lords of Olympus campaign, it is still that. It's still serious in a way. There's like a serious menace to the world, to the multiverse, and there's serious issues that people have, and a lot of it is focused on family conflicts. And this one, I decided to run it in a somewhat more tongue-in-cheek style, a kind of a, I don't know, if not a black comedy style, but in the style of what do you call it? In the style of stuff like the Wes Anderson movies, okay? So like the Royal Tenenbaums or Life Aquatic. So it's this weird kind of, like, everybody's a little bit eccentric. They're this very powerful family of immortals, so they should be eccentric. And they all have, like, strange little foibles and ridiculous little plans. And there's all kinds of, you know, long held conflicts and issues, and nobody's really quite right in this particular campaign, right? They're all kind of weirdos. And it's just fantastic fun, right? Because the characters are all, like, the players have really gone into it, right? So we've got, like, one guy who's the son of Poseidon, and he's you know, he was actually originally a guy that was born in Argentina and goes through life as this kind of con man, you know. And then we have the one character playing the daughter of Zeus. Erit is her character's name, and she's just insane. Like, her character's, she's basically the female version of Dionysus, who she meets and falls in love with, even though, you know, they're brother and sister. But I guess, you know, the Greek gods did this sort of stuff. And now they're off on to fulfill Dionysus' destiny to conquer the multiverse. He's supposedly destined to replace his father Zeus, and he thinks that the way to do this is to first beat Shiva Nataraj in a dance-off, and then recruit a bunch of Hindu gods and other weirdo, you know, kind of like all the freaks and losers of the Olympian pantheon to come behind him, to join him in this plot that will somehow, you know, has a big question mark in the middle, and then step 3 is conquer the multiverse. So there we are. And you know, all of them are really great characters. There's one guy who, his character, he didn't know who he was at first, and then it turns out that his mother was an island, and his other mother was Hecate, so who was also the island's daughter or sister, I forget which one. And Hecate basically wants to use him to take over the world. And Hecate's a complete badass in the campaign. It's been a really amazing campaign. It's got just this perfect mix, which you see also a lot in the works of Wes Anderson, I would add, and of being just the right level of humor, just the right level of drama, the interpersonal conflicts, and then interspersed with, like, these moments of incredible action that can sometimes be heart-wrenching, or sometimes be ridiculous, or sometimes be both, right? So it's been a very weird campaign, but so far I've been very happy with it. This is a campaign I've got 7 players, and this is a campaign where attendance is a must because there's so many. All the characters are in different places. All the characters have different allegiances. All of them are doing stuff that affects the other characters, and so it means if one person misses, I cancel the game. And it's the opposite of the DCC game. I'm super strict there. And so my players complain about that, but that shows you how much they love this game. That they will move heaven and earth to come and play it, and they love to play it. And we run that game on the week 1 Saturdays, I guess you'd call it, and it goes from week 1 Saturdays, and it goes from like 6 p.m. until sometimes as early as 5 or 6 a.m. So sometimes we're playing 12 hours of this per session, and it's just non-stop entertainment. It's just fantastic. Anyway, so that's my third of 4 campaigns I'm currently running. If you have any questions about my Lords of Olympus campaign, feel free to ask. Brian Nguyen says, Pundit, so would you say that the cosmology of the world of the last sun is based somewhat on the Qliphoth? Well, no, the Qliphoth is the shadow reflection of those planes, both in the Kabbalah and I guess in the world of the last sun. The Qliphoth is the shell reflection of the actual 10 spheres that exists in the level below the abyss, so to say. So in fact, in that world of the last sun, the nether regions include the 10 versions of the 10 spheres, the 10 planes in their reversed form. What I'd say is the cosmology of the world of the last sun is actually based on the Tree of Life itself, but just a really goofy version of it. I guess that's how I'd put it. Lord Metal Demon says, question, in some of your other videos, you've mentioned your consulting work on 5th edition. Have you run a 5th edition campaign then? If so, how long has it lasted? That's a very good question. And the answer is no. I've never run a 5th edition campaign. I've run a couple of one-shots, and that's basically it. I knew, even as I was designing it, that that would probably never be my favorite game. That wasn't the goal in my consultancy. I didn't want to consult to make the game that I wanted necessarily. I knew that I needed to create a game that new school players would want to play, that had some of the best parts of old school play. And to me, the most important part was the modularity of the game. So I wanted to create a game that wasn't going to suck, first of all, the way that a certain previous edition to 5th sucked horribly, right? That was going to be a success, and that was going to be something that could bridge that gap and could bring back some of the old school principles that were part of the reason why the new school edition had not been doing as well, right? And I think that was a success in a way. 5th edition in many ways has got more of the old school spirit than either 3rd edition or well, that's it. There was only 3rd and 5th because there was never any edition in between the two that could be called D&D. Sorry, 3rd edition or 3.5. Yeah, there was. So I knew that I probably wouldn't ever run a 5th edition campaign myself. I might, you never know, it could happen. But like, if I ran it, the way I would modulate it would probably be into something that was really close to one of my OSR games, right? It would end up looking probably a lot like something like Lion and Dragon. So for that, I might as well just play Lion and Dragon then. Ovaltine Patrol says, ever run any games in an early modern context like the 30 Years' War or the Deluge? Trying to think about this. I ran a game set in the 17th century. Basically the around the time of just before the 30 Years' War started, which was a game that was basically the characters were agents of a very old Queen Elizabeth trying to help preserve England's stability in light of her coming death. I ran that game using the Capitana de Triste system, which is a Spanish RPG. Fantastic game. I I think between that, so that was set like in I think when I started it was set in like 1598 or something like that. Um, this was many years ago, so I don't remember exactly. It was like more than 10 years ago, I think. But so between that and then the next thing over that I ran would, in terms of a historical game, is probably my Wild West campaign, which starts in 1876. So I have a big early modern gap, you could say. I did not, in fact, run a lot of games in the early modern era. Iron Cross says, what do you think about Borderland Provinces by Frog God Games? I haven't seen it, I'm sorry to say, so I don't know. George Whittlebuck, Lorraine McLaren Hoopy says, tell me about your Old West game. That campaign that is now finished. We just finished it a couple of months ago. It was a fantastic campaign. The game ran in the game world from 1876 to, I think, about almost 1890. It ended... yeah, I think it must have been 1890 because it ended with the Cimarron County War. So yeah, so it was a really fantastic game because we played it with aces and eights, but it was set in the historical Wild West. No magic, no supernatural, no nothing. It was the Wild West in our reality, in our world, with nothing outside of that added on, right? And the player characters were originally based in Dodge City. Later on, they moved to Las Vegas, and then after that, they moved to Tombstone. And then in the last phase of the campaign, after the Wyatt Earp Vendetta ride, they broke up and went into different areas, different places, and then had like we skipped the last couple of sessions we skipped ahead about a year each session to like do like stuff that came up later on. And like when they had reunion meetings, so to say, like at the Dodge County, the Dodge County Peace Commission and things like that. So they Dodge City Peace Commission. So they the adventure was, the setting was absolutely historical, and the characters were completely they were complete products of their era, right? They were interestingly enough, only a couple of them were really focused on being lawmen or even gunfighters. And one of the most successful character in that game was a character that ended up, he was called Crazy Miller, and he came to Dodge City with almost nothing. And by the end of the campaign, so like some 15 years later, he was an incredibly wealthy man, a rancher in the West. Like, he built himself up along the way, doing all kinds of very not nasty things and making alliances with nasty people. So, but it was really great. It was a great character. Then another very successful character was Kid Taylor, who started as like this, like, like a 16-year-old homeless scoundrel that was just, human garbage, basically. And then by the end of the campaign, he'd actually studied and became a doctor, right? And along the way, he'd been a gunfighter, right? But then he kind of like gave that up to get married, to have kids, and to study medicine, right? So it was a very interesting campaign. And it proved to me that definitely you do not need to add something to the Wild West to make a Wild West campaign interesting. Not at all. Ryan Nguyen says, Pundit, would you ever consider doing a streamed online campaign? Well, over at Inappropriate Characters, where we have that's another channel you should join. It's where myself, Venture Satanis, and Grim Jim DeBurrow get together and we chat about controversies in gaming and stuff like that. But in fact, the last couple of months, at least for a couple of times, we've had sessions where Venger wanted to run his Chult setting, and he did a live stream DMing of that. And I've never played online. I don't like playing online. I play in person. All my campaigns I'm describing right now are played in person in my house, and so I didn't want to play And instead, so in these live streams, while they're playing, I'm in the live chat, basically roasting them. It's been really fun for me, actually, to get to roast them, especially Venger during the play. But in the last one of these, I said that if I get a $1,000 PayPal payment or to my Patreon or something, that I'd probably have to like do a live stream of my Dungeon Crawl Classics, or something like that, just to show Venger how it's done. Not Aaron, I see you said there he might run a DCC campaign online to show us how it's done. Well, more specifically than us, to show Venger how to DM. How to DM a Gonzo game, because Chult is a Gonzo setting, right? And yeah, I just thought that his DMing. Well, let's say I found some of it roastable. Samurai says, Pundit, thought on urban fantasy as a concept. Young YA, I assume, means young adult. Right now is pretty cringy, let's be honest. Yeah, I mean, I don't read any young adult novels, so I have no idea, but I've heard that it's like one of these areas of, publishing and media that has been taken over completely by SJW interests. I think urban fantasy can be really cool, actually. There's, Over the Edge is an RPG that I love that is basically an urban fantasy in a weird kind of dystopian city. And in fact, at some point, I am going to make a modern occult OSR game that will, I guess, have elements of urban fantasy to them, and I think it'll be pretty good. I think it really depends on who's doing it, right? Aaron says, if you had to play any D&D edition with the rules as written, which edition would you choose? I think if it had to be a D&D edition, probably the Rules Cyclopedia. Lord Metal Demon says, question, with regards to our own campaigns, is it all theater of the mind, or do you use, I assume you meant with regards to your own campaigns, is it all theater of the mind, or do you use figures, minis, and maps? No, in my campaigns, it's always been theater of the mind. I've never liked playing with minis. It's one of the reasons I never really ended up getting into, especially 3.5, where basically they tried to make miniatures like absolutely necessary. Really didn't like that. And yeah, I always do theater of the mind. But I do it in a way that requires, maybe it's, it requires very significant visualization, because I don't ignore things like range or distance in combat, right? Sometimes I'll make notes. What I might do is put notes of, next to when I'm keeping track of initiative or something, how far away a person is from X, and then change that if they move and stuff like that, right? So to help keep track and to visualize all of this going on in the mind, right? It's not just winging it either, right? Because you can go too far the other way, where suddenly you don't know where anyone is or what they're doing in the middle of a combat, and you just like say, okay, I go with it, whatever, right? But I disagree with that. That's not what, we're not, this isn't an episode of She-Ra or something. We're not gonna, this isn't Game of Thrones where somebody can be sent 1,200 miles to send a raid. The dragon comes flying back or something like that. I swear, but one of the things that the TV series established is that both ravens, dragons, and bastard sons of Robert Baratheon all have teleportation power. They just never told anyone. D&D, as we know, was designed originally for theater of the mind, not for minis predominantly. There's a misconception people have that it was designed for minis. Cringy and young adults, has anyone seen anything? Seen the new preview for the? I'm assuming you don't mean Fear the Walking Dead, the spin-off, a while now, because actually sometimes I think Fear the Walking Dead has been more watchable than Walking Dead itself. Lord Metal Demon says, any plans to create a companion medieval setting to Dark Albion that covers parts of mainland Europe? I'd love to see anything covering Germanic or Hungarian history. Well, you know, in the Dark Albion book itself, I have a chapter on the continent where I don't know if you've got that book already, if you've looked at it, but when you do, check out that section where I talk about, Hungary is given a place of honor in it. Matthias Corvinus was one of the great bastards of the 16th century. He was a magnificent, shockingly impressive guy. Not as impressive, of course, as Casimir Jagiello, who ultimately got the upper hand on him. But yeah, so I do go into detail there and in the timeline section about things going on in the continent. But of course, I don't go into as much detail as I do with Albion itself. To answer your question, I don't know. It's possible at some point I might do a source book about mainland Europe. But really, the two projects I have in mind of doing for future Lion and Dragon setting sourcebook stuff is either a Lion and Dragon setting book for the Anarchy, which was a period a couple of centuries before the time of Dark Albion, or the Crusades, which would not be mainland Europe, but it would be the Middle East, which would be interesting, perhaps, the Crusader states. Plus, it would drive certain people absolutely nuts, right? The RPG Pundit is doing a setting book about the Crusades. Oh my God. Brian, no, I had no idea that there was going to be another spin-off of Walking Dead. Well, I guess we're up to date with the question now. So I'll bring you into now my fourth and final campaign, which is the newest one, the one I'm just starting now. Like we did a couple of previous. We actually did in this one a 2-session prequel, a mini prequel to what the actual campaign is going to be. And this is basically going to be a Star Wars OSR campaign. And I'm setting it in the Star Wars universe. I'm going to be using a set of rules that are a variant of the Lion and Dragon rules that I've made for Space Opera OSR, which I hope will come out in a few weeks from now or a couple of months from now. I don't know when exactly, but when issue number 100 of RPG Pundit Presents come out, the plan is that's going to be issue 100. And right now, because we've been trying to do this Medieval Authentic Companion, and because the publisher has been changed, basically all RPG Pundit Presents has been moved to a new publisher, which is Spectre Press. The link is in the description below. You can check out all my current library of issues. They're all there on DTRPG for you to buy. But it means that for the last few weeks, there hasn't been a new issue, right? Like the last issue was RPG Pundit Presents number 97, Pocket Planes. So we're only 3 issues away from issue 100. But that won't necessarily be in 3 weeks' time. First, the Medieval Authentic Companion has to come out, and then probably after that comes out, because we're going to want to start working immediately on the next compilation volume that we're going to put together, we may switch up the production of RPG Pundit Presents issues to once every couple of weeks, every 2 or 3 weeks. So it might not come out as quickly as we would have thought. But anyways, issue number 100 of RPG Pundit Presents is going to be the Space Opera OSR rules, which is going to be a really interesting product. I just saw a comment here by Buried Axeplay saying, "Is Casimir drunk?" No, I'm not drunk. I'm not sure why you think I'm drunk. Did I sound drunk or something? My throat is a little hoarse because I've been talking nonstop for 1 hour and 45 minutes. But I'm not drunk. I had quite a few drinks last night, but I haven't had a single drink all day today. Anyways, these OSR space opera rules are going to be similar to the rules of Lion and Dragon, but for a space opera setting. And for the campaign that I'm going to be running on with it is going to be a Star Wars campaign, but it's going to be set about 10 years after the rise of the empire, which is to say about 10 years before A New Hope. So it's going to be set at the peak period of the imperial power, right? When the empire was as powerful as possible, and when the rebellion was still basically didn't exist, right? Like there were maybe some dissident groups, some resistant groups here and there. There were criminal organizations. There were people that weren't happy with the empire, but the rebellion in capital letters didn't really exist yet at all. And it's also not going to be a campaign necessarily about the player characters creating the rebellion or something like that. That's not the purpose, right? Like there was already, I mean, obviously there's Bail Organa or whatever was doing his thing over there. You already had he was already working against the emperor, but that's neither here nor there for this campaign. In this campaign, it's going to be about the player characters are all going to be a group of condemned criminals that manage to escape and then have to kind of work their way through the setting in a world where the empire has enormous amounts of power, but where they accidentally come across an object of great power of their own that will both help them to survive and put an enormous target on their backs, right? So that's the basic concept of this campaign. And obviously there's going to be like no Jedi, right? It's going to be very kind of 70s style Star Wars, like what we all imagined the world to be when the first movie came out, before we had any of the other details. I'm not going to be following any of the canon about like stuff from the expanded universe or anything like that. It's going to be my own like alternate universe Star Wars. It's going to have a very kind of punk space opera style, or not even punk, pre-punk space opera you see in this kind of broken down world in the New Hope movie, but before there was even a rebellion to fight against the emperor. And but I can't say too much about it yet because this is something that just started. Right. The prequel adventures were 2 sessions that were meant to like let my players play test these OSR rules. It's where we did the play test of these rules. So we changed a few things in the final version of these rules based on that play test. And the adventure ended with all those player characters being executed by the Empire. So it's not going to be those characters that are going to be playing. It's a completely different group of characters. And that was intentional. That was all part of the kind of the plan. And I do have kind of I don't know how long this campaign will be, but I have a long-term plan for it. In real time, I'm guessing probably maybe 3 or 4 years of play, maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. You guys have already noticed, even if you haven't watched me before, but if you have watched me before, you probably already knew this. I play very long campaigns. To me, any campaign that runs less than 2 years is a short campaign. My longest campaign right now has been going on for 7 years. Lords of Olympus has been going on for, I think, 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And the Lion and Dragon campaign has also been going on for 2 or 3 years. Maybe a little less than that. I'm not sure. But anyways, those are both, to me, still new campaigns. I think of those two as new campaigns. Right now, the only old campaign I'm running is DCC. But I think at some point, those two will also be old campaigns, and neither of them are going to end anytime soon. Anyway, so that's the 4th of my campaigns. I've now fulfilled my requirement to do this live stream, but I'll keep answering a few of your questions before we're done. Same Rises says, is there a significant difference between Venice's republic and a modern republic we should know about before adapting it to D&D? Well, Venice didn't have a modern style republic. It didn't have like a universal suffrage, right? And not even a universal male suffrage, right? It was a lot. It was very different. It wasn't a democracy in the modern sense that we know of, but it was it wasn't an autocracy in the sense of most of the rest of the medieval world. I think you would probably want to read up a little bit more about it before just, making assumptions about it. You, at the very least, I don't know, look at the Wikipedia page on the Venetian Republic. George Whittlebuckler, Rain McLaren Tubi says, not WG Star Wars. No, I never actually liked West End Games Star Wars very much. If I was going to run Star Wars in something other than my own system, I'd probably use Star Wars D20 Revised, but I really didn't want to do that either. I wanted an OSR Star Wars, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And soon you'll be able to get it too when issue 100 comes out. Charlotte Williams says, would you ever consider making a video about Theater of the Mind, like a how-to guide? Yeah, actually, that's an amazing idea. I will add it to my list of future videos to make, in fact. I'll write it down right now so I don't forget, because my memory isn't what it used to be. I also apparently can't talk and type with 2 fingers at the same time. All right. Well, thank you for that suggestion, Charlotte. And at some point, I will make a video about Theater of the Mind. Thank you. Very good idea. Yeah, if I sound drunk, Axblade, it's probably just that my throat is gone from talking this long. Brian Nguyen asks, will the players have the agency to change the timeline of Star Wars as we know it? For example, to bang Leia. That's a great example. Look, first of all, yes, the player characters will be able to do whatever they want in the setting. And stuff they do could very easily lead to a completely different timeline. Keep in mind, as far as banging Leia, is that at this moment in the timeline, Leia's like 9 years old or something like that. So probably not the best example, actually, when you think about it. Also, the part of this campaign is that it absolutely will not be about the Star Wars stable of characters. Right? Like, they're not going to run into Chewbacca and R2-D2. They're not going to, it's not going to be about that. They probably will hear of some of these people. Like, they might hear at some point about Bail Organa, or they might hear about, Tarkin, or, obviously they know who Darth Vader is. But even there, in all of those, there's probably, unless they go out of their way to try to find these characters, that's not something that's meant to happen in the campaign, right? Like, they're not supposed to run into these guys. And like, that's part of my goal, is to make it completely its own thing, right? In a way, it's sort of similar to how The Mandalorian so far, the first issue anyway, seems to be kind of its own thing. And it's not, it's not about Han and Leia and Lando or any of that. It's not even about Boba Fett, thank God, right? It's actually a totally separate thing. And I want my Star Wars campaign to be a totally separate thing. That in fact, I'm not going to have them. They're never going to go to Tatooine, at least not on my volition. They'll, if they go to Tatooine, it's because they want to. And if they suggest going to Tatooine, I'm going to ask how their character even knows about Tatooine, because it's not an important planet, right? It's like stuff like that. They're not going. The point is not to make this about some kind of nostalgia trip through the Star Wars canon. But that said, if they do stuff that ends up affecting that canon and changes it, sure, great. I mean, I don't care, because at some point that campaign is going to end, and it's probably going to end before the time of A New Hope. In fact, the setup of that campaign in terms of the internal timeline is that it ends before there really isn't even a real beginning to the rebellion, unless they're the ones that make the beginning of the rebellion. Kevin the Journey says, I'm a little late. I hope no one suicided anyone in my absence. Well, no, though some people are trying to help Catboy suicide himself. Lord Metal Demon says, my wife wants to know why Uruguay. I've been telling her about you in anticipation of the arrival of L&D and the Dark Albion books. No, it's not too personal of a question. I originally came, there are some of the SJWs have made up stories about this, like that I'm on the run from the law, like that I can't go back to Canada. In fact, I go back to Canada every few years. I just don't publicize it, specifically because some of these assholes could try to put me up before a human rights commission. Canada, basically, if you're not a Canadian right now, you should know Canada has basically very slowly turned into a totalitarian state, right? Where if somebody doesn't like you, and especially if you're conservative, they could put you up to a trial that doesn't have to follow the regular rules of law, that will cost you $100,000, that you will almost certainly lose and have to pay damages to the person who makes whatever accusation against you, however ridiculous. Like you literally have to be a creepy transgendered person who goes after little girls in swim clubs and wants to have her balls waxed by immigrant women that she hates in order to get a judgment against you in the human rights tribunals, right? So I make a point of avoiding people knowing when I'm in Canada, right? But I am in no way unable to go to Canada. I totally am, right? I came to Uruguay as a tourist in a time when I was going all over the world, exploring different places. And I really liked Uruguay. I had come originally with a 3-month visa to stay to visit. And I decided to tear up my return ticket and move here because I was really happy here. And Uruguay is not the most exciting country to visit. I mean, if you have to choose between visiting Montevideo or visiting Buenos Aires for tourism purposes, Buenos Aires kicks its ass. It's a much more exciting city to visit in South America, right? I'm sure that there are other cities that would also be more exciting to visit in South America. But if you're looking for a place to live, Montevideo is a really nice place to live. Right? And Uruguay as a country is a really good place to live. It's the least crazy place in South America. It's still pretty crazy, but it's the least crazy one. Kevin the Jury says, do you have any tips for running intrigue mystery in OSR games? Seems mechanics are usually lacking in this area. Well, Kevin, what I would say is, why not role play it? That's the answer. The trick is you have to do this by role playing it, right? Like don't rely on the characters having dice rolls to do intrigues or mysteries or things like that. Require that they use their own observation. I mean, obviously you can have like things like perception checks, maybe, but you shouldn't use like, oh, I got a +30 in diplomacy, so I make this guy do this. No, you want to make this guy do this in the OSR, you got to go and role play it, right? And that's part of what makes it so cool, right? The absence of those rules aren't a bug; they're a feature that makes it better. Marcelo Sepulveda says, have you seen or tried the FFG version of Star Wars? I have not tried it. I've seen it. I don't think I would like it. Buried Axeblade says, bunch of Muslim gamers getting out of here on sub. I don't know what you are talking about, but okay. Whatever. Brian Nguyen says, killing things and taking their stuff okay, but having sex is wrong. I'm not sure where that's coming. Are people having some conversation I'm not seeing here? I don't know. Kevin the Jordy says, the Muslim supplement of Lion and Dragon would be great. Play either side of the Crusades. Yeah, of course, if I make a Crusades campaign, it will have the Crusaders and the Crusader states. It'll have, which are not the same thing, by the way, and then it'll have, probably the forces of Saladin, and then it'll also have the Ismaili Muslims and the assassins. And the way I would look at it, I would probably allow all of those to be potentially playable. Obviously, a DM, depending on his campaign, would decide what he wants to do. Like if he wants to have an all Templar campaign or something like that and wants to only have them, you have to play a Templar Knight, well, then that's fine, right? You can do that you should be able to do that. If you want to have a campaign where your characters are all, Muslims or all people that are natives of the Crusader states or people that have all come with Richard the Lionheart or whatever, right? Like you should be able to do that. So, but I will want to provide all the options. And fortunately, I know quite a lot about the medieval period, the Crusades, Islam as a religion, Ismaili Islam, and obviously Christianity. So yeah, I don't think I'll have a problem making any of those credible. Lord Metal Demon says, I'm a Canadian from Saskatchewan. Let's go for a few drinks next time you head up here, RPG Pundit. Well, I haven't been to Saskatchewan since I was a kid, but maybe I will, like you never know. I might have to come out there and do like some kind of a tour if Alberta and Saskatchewan successfully separate and become a free country and, enshrine themselves in freedom of speech and all those things that the Laurentian elite hate. And suddenly it becomes a country worth having. Yeah, I'll totally, if I go there, I'll look you up. Right. So I think I missed something in the chat there because I see people having like some weird conversation that is that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but whatever. I guess that's none of my business. I've said everything I had to say today. We're at the 2-hour mark. If you have something else to ask me, now would be the time. And meanwhile, what I will say is thank you to everyone who's been watching. Thank you to everyone who watches after. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss future live streams. And also make a point of sharing this video or any of my other videos anywhere you think that people will like it, or where you think people won't like them. You can do that too. Why not? So be sure to share everywhere, basically. And if you want to support me, well, I do have a Patreon link and I do have a PayPal link, but I don't tell people to use those. If you really want to, go right ahead. I'm not going to stop you, but my recommendation is that if you want to support me, we don't have a super chat here on this live stream, but one thing you can do is click on in the description the RPG Pundit Presents series, which is a collection of currently 97 different issues of OSR source material. There's adventures, there's setting stuff, there's items, there's magic, there's monsters, there's magical techniques, there's all kinds of stuff on society and culture, there's area books, city books, all sorts of stuff, both in the medieval authentic style and also the gonzo gaming style. And you can check it out, and they cost anywhere between like $1 to $5 at the most, so about the same price as people do for super chats, and you get something immediately in return for that. So if you go on there and you pick up RPG Pundit number 74, Medieval Authentic Aristocracy, or RPG Pundit Presents number 76, The Fire Demons of Croyland, a really cool medieval authentic adventure. Or if you pick up RPG Pundit Presents number 80, 100 really minor magic items, which are a list of very interesting minor magic items, or any number of other issues, you get something for your donation. So you're helping me out, you're encouraging me to keep doing stuff, but you're also going to get stuff that you can use in your campaigns. So yeah, help me out with that if you feel like it. If you don't have the money for it, or you just don't want to buy stuff, then you can still help me out by sharing, by commenting, and by subscribing, which are a big help. Let's see if the last few questions here. This is the last call. Aaron the Pedantic says, do you like RPG books to have a particular stylistic voice, or do you want it to be very straightforward? Well, I know what I don't like in RPGs. Like, I can be very tolerant of whatever style of writing an RPG designer has. Some RPG designers can be slightly more flowery in their writing. Some write it like a technical manual. And all of that, you can bear it. As long as it's coherent and readable and understandable, that's okay. But the thing I hate is when they try to be cool and edgy in their writing, especially when they add a bunch of in-game fiction that is always bad quality, or when they have like some kind of like, oh, I'm Scully the Skull and I'm gonna, guide you through this game, right? Like as if they've invented a fictional character to be part of what describes how to play the game, right? Like that sort of bullshit is just right out. I look at that and I just say, forget it. I don't want anything to do with this game. Right? So that's what I don't like. Anything else I can pretty much stand. Lord Metal Demon says, you mentioned in your other videos that you're a historian. Any desire to cover Chinese or Japanese history in a setting like Dark Albion? Well, that would be interesting. I'm not really an expert on Japanese history. I am an expert on Eastern philosophy and Eastern religions, including, because of that, his cultural history of China. I know quite a bit about that. However, there is already a really good China-based RPG. It's not an OSR game, but it's a fantastic game. It's called Kin, QIN, which is a wuxia action game set at the end of the Warring States period. Really cool. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's a possibility at some point. There's also a wuxia OSR supplement that's called, I think, the Golden Scrolls of Justice, which I was actually a consultant on, and it's done. I think, who made that? Damn it! You'd think I'd remember, right? Let me just quickly look it up here, unless someone knows. Golden Scroll of Justice by BRW Games. It was written by Joseph Block. Good guy, and that's actually a really cool. If you want to put wuxia action-based stuff with elements, like, it's not absolutely authentic, right? But it is really strongly influenced by authentic Chinese mythology, history, and folklore. So it's got some really credible stuff in there, and in that sense, I would recommend it. Lord Metal Demon says, thanks for your time. Can't wait for L&D and Dark Albion books to arrive. Well, I really hope that you get them soon, and let me know what you think about them. Share that with me on Mewe or whatever, and yeah, it'll be great. Pundit, Iron Cross says, Pundit, the Great Pendragon campaign is definitely able to be used as a source book for other systems as well. The Great Pendragon campaign has mechanical features like, the stats are done for the Pendragon game, but it's really easy to modify everything else to run as an OSR campaign. Like, there's no reason that I see why you couldn't do that, right? Like, the core of it is setting stuff, and it's actually like this long timeline of Arthurian history that has been impeccably researched by the wonderful Greg Stafford, who has recently passed away, I think, this year. But yeah, it's an amazing book, and you could definitely use it as a source book for other systems. Yeah, I mean, the mechanical part is just really the stats of creatures. And, well, I mean, there's like army lists for stuff like the mass combat system. So you'd have to modify those sorts of things. But really, like, 9/10 of it is setting and setting events. And the mechanical part is very small, right? The mechanical part of the Pendragon game is in the Pendragon RPG main book, right? So yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. Aaron says, yay for free consultation. It wasn't free consultation. I was a paid consultant. I will mention, in the Golden Scroll of Justice, I was a paid consultant. However, I don't get any royalties. If you buy that game, none of that money goes to me. So if you're buying it, don't buy it for me. Buy it if you like it. I recommend it because I think it's good, but I'm not making money off of any sales of it now, right? So if you hate me, don't not buy it because you think it'll make me money. It won't. I got paid a fixed price, and I'm done, right? So yeah. But I was a paid consultant. I don't do free consulting anymore. Oh, about writing style. Okay, yeah, I guess I did a little bit. Yeah, I did consult a little bit with you for free about what to do in terms of writing style. Yes. The main thing is legible. It's to be direct and to let people, to make it something that people can very easily understand what you're talking about. There are other tips that could be done, right? But I'm sure that you can get it done. Maybe someday I'll do a video about, how to organize the writing of a book. We'll see. Okay, guys, I guess that we're just about wrapping up here. This has been the RPG Pundit. Again, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, share the video or share my other videos. Check out the RPG Pundit Presents weekly zine, I guess you could say, of OSR material. You're bound to find something there you're going to like, and buying the issues of RPG Pundit Presents is a great way to send me a tip. buy some for your friends or something. I don't know. I don't know how that would work. Also, the Medieval Authentic OSR Companion is coming really soon, within probably the next 2 weeks at the latest. Hope you guys have enjoyed this tonight. And Epstein didn't commit suicide. Epstein didn't kill himself. Currently smoking. This is Lorenzetti Half Volcano plus Blue Boar.